Another entry in my reading list for Shakespeare in September. This is a nonfiction book called How to Be a Tudor by Ruth Goodman, who is credited, in the bio and stuff. They talk about history documentaries she's done on television. I guess like BBC documentaries and stuff, or where she lives. They try and recreate domestic life at different times. I believe she has another one about how to be a Victorian or Edwardian or something like that. So this is the Tudor age. She's talking about life, day-to-day life in the reign of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, which Elizabeth I that would coincide with the first part of Shakespeare's career. A very interesting book. It's pop history, so it's not a lot of detail and stuff. People who read a lot of history probably wouldn't be as interested as people like me who are dilettantes. But it takes the format of going through the day of a person, of various people. So it starts with dawn, with the cocks crowing. And discusses hygiene, getting dressed, having breakfast, education, dinner, difference between men's work and women's work, then leisure time, supper, and bedtime. A lot of interesting stuff. Of course, it's always fun to read about how people lived in other times and how they differ from us. And in books like this, there's often really fun facts you'd find that are just, haven't really made its way into the popular consciousness. For one thing that struck at me, there's a section on leisure time and time to play, I guess, where they talk about dancing. And there are books that, I got to go to another section here. Books that, or pamphlets, whatever, that published dance steps and things like that. And of course, we think of dancing as a party exercise, an evening exercise, or maybe on a weekend or something. But I thought it was interesting to find that some of the wealthy people did dancing in the morning before breakfast. Like obviously, if you're a working Joe, you're out, or working Joe or Jane, you're out milking the cows, plowing, things like that. But there's discussions in here that Queen Elizabeth danced, even into old age every day. It's kind of in some households it was like what we consider a morning workout or morning routine. Is people would get together, the people in the household, and dance for half an hour or something. As a way to get the blood going, is the way they discuss it here, but as exercise. And I thought that was pretty cool. It's kind of like yoga, I guess, workout, or no, what do people do? Or that was so popular in the 80s and 90s. Why can't I think of that? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Aerobics. That's what I was trying to say. And then it goes through the whole day. There's a lot of stuff about beds. Beds were a very important part of the household. Kind of makes sense about the beds being prominent in Shakespeare's will and things like that, because it was such an important, elaborate piece of furniture. They had those canopy beds. You could pull the canopies down at night because you could not heat a whole house. Most people didn't have windows of any kind. There's no glass windows. You might have shutters or something, but it could get pretty cold at night. So you would pull those canopies down, and be able to sleep. And finally get warm. All the different kinds of stuff like that. What else was interesting? One particular fact. You read about the food that was available to people, which was quite different in some ways. Not entirely different. They had bacon and eggs, so I could have survived breakfast there. They usually ate breakfast like mid-morning, and morning would start whenever the sun came up, when the cock started crowing. So they'd get up at 4 and they'd work for 2 or 3 hours. Then they'd have breakfast. Then they'd work for a few more hours. Then they would have dinner, which might be like 10 a.m. That'd be their second meal called dinner. And over the years it became a bit later and later. And of course, in the city, more people who worked in the city had later schedules. And another fun thing to look in this kind of book, there are so many. There's a few different series like this. There's How to Be a Tudor like this, How to Be a Tudor. There's Everyday Life in Elizabethan England, I think, is one by a different author. And there's one called The Time Traveler's Guides to different periods of mostly English history, but sometimes American pioneer era or something. Anything that appeals to people who read mostly, and who want to know what the lives of people that they read about were like. So, it's fun. It's light reading. It's its own thing. It's kind of a subgenre of pop history, I guess. It's fun to look at all these ancient these contemporary texts that she lists in her bibliography, primary sources. There's books like The Writing Schoolmaster, which by Peter Bales, 1590, which was a book to guide schoolmasters, I guess, and books of homilies, books of like how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife, all that kind of stuff. List of luxuries. What else? There's some cool names in there. They're just fun to peruse. I don't know how available any of these books are any place outside of museums. I don't know if they've been scanned anywhere where anybody could just read them. Proper Book of Cookery by Anonymous. A lot of anonymous books. Here's a good one about gambling, I guess. This is also by Anonymous. It was called A Manifest Detection of the Most Vile and Detestable Use of Dice Play. So, discussion of dice, playing games, and probably loaded dice and things like that. Let's see. Here's the funny one. This might have been fiction, though. It's also by Anonymous. A Merry Jest of John Johnson and Jackman his wife, whose jealousy was justly the cause of all their strife. So I guess that was a poem, probably. And I'm having almost as much fun looking through the bibliography, stuff I'll never read, but just to see what kind of books people were writing at the time about their own society. Here's one by Thomas Beacon, Homilies Against Whoredom. So I guess that was kind of a religious tract of some kind, or like kind of a moral tract. And here's Richard Braithwaite, 1603, wrote some rules and orders for the government of the house of an earl. So there was plenty at that time. There were plenty of books available to wealthy people, to literate people, about how to run their lives. Self-help books, I guess you would call them. Book of Household Prayers by Thomas Beza, 1603. And then, of course, mixed in here, there's more recent history books too. Books about how people traveled by land. There's books about the theater that directly might interest people who are interested in the plays of Shakespeare. The few theaters in London. Of course, there's whole books on that, about the handful of theaters in London. Dedicated theaters were a new invention at this time. Before that, plays would be put on in like a courtyard, or like in front of a town square, or in front of a pub or whatnot. There's the difference between lager and beer, which I learned a little bit about. I'm still really not. Ale and beer, which I'm still really not that clear on. If I went to a bar and ordered an ale or a beer, I would, think the taste was a little different. I wouldn't know of any other differences. But apparently ale came first, beer came later. They drink beer at breakfast. They drink beer all the time. It was a substitute for water. There's a funny bit in there about, because of health reasons, sanitation reasons most likely. But there's some of the health theories that were put on top of that. Like there's one passage in here somewhere where where a physician is, or a health recommendator is talking about, you really shouldn't drink water unless you grew up drinking water, because it's too watery. And beer and lager were considered to be more robust, like they had nutritional value, which I guess I think they do. I don't know, because beer has carbs in it, right? So that must be calories. But just and had heating properties. You do feel warm if you drink more. That's for sure. Let's see. And books on different forms of entertainment besides playwriting. They love their animal torture, bear baiting. It doesn't go into that a lot, but it's sad to think about. They would chain up these bears and have dogs. Mastiffs were animals that they used in like, well, I almost called it torture porn. I guess in a way it is. Watching animals fight, getting animals to fight. Very short section on that. I don't think she wants to dwell in it. I don't think anybody wants to, but it was definitely a thing. And the theaters had to compete with it. They had to compete with entertainments like bear baiting, where people would torture a bear, or they would stick dogs on a chained up bull or something. That was the British version of bullfighting. Would be to chain up a bull and have either people or mastiffs attack it. So, it's just the unpleasant part of the human condition, I guess. I don't think it's entirely gone away, but there's ideas about color. There are different colors, different dyes being discovered or isolated at the time. A lot of good stuff about fashion and how little amount of clothes people had, but how they took care of them and how expensive clothes were. Expensive food was. Rent was relatively cheap. People's budget almost all went to food, and unless they were raising all their own food. Anyway, I guess that's really it. It's worth reading. You can kind of pick it up and put it down. It's not very long. It's around 300 pages before you get to the indices and things like that. A Diary Book for Good Housewives by Thomas Hackett, London, 1588. Another thing is which is so interesting to read about in the age of spell check, is how many, how there's really no consistent spelling, and people spelled things how it sounded to their ears. So this guy wrote Huswifs, and Huswyfs. Someone else might write housewife like we would recognize it. And there's one, I think it was one of the dance step patterns, whatever you call it, essay on dance steps that she points out, that she quotes, and one author in one paragraph, and he's saying the person on the first does this, this person does this, and he uses the word first 4 times in one paragraph, and he spells it different each time. So there was no standardized spelling, or very little standardized spelling like we have today, which would have made Twitter impossible for the pedants, to be, you spelled that wrong. That's not how you spell first. Fyrst is first, not Firste. You idiot. So that might have been fun for the social media of the day, if there was one. An introduction to the Physic by Christopher Langton, 1545. I don't know why I'm so enamored of this, but I am, and I enjoyed reading it. If you like that kind of stuff, this one works pretty good. There are many. I don't know if they're as popular right now as they were, but there's a bunch of them published in the last 20, 30 years, I think, of this type of book that talks about everyday life long ago. And I guess that'll do it for today. I got very important things I got to do today. Very important. I just can't go into it. Very important life stuff going on, which I'll probably not be able to talk about for 6 months or so. But don't worry about it. It's all good stuff. Okay, talk to you later.